My mother-in-law announced that I was mentally unfit to control my dead husband's company while a recording on my phone captured her saying his death had been a necessary correction, and that I should be next. She made her announcement before 70 guests at the second memorial for my husband, Sebastian Morrow. We were standing beneath a white tent on the rain-dark lawn of the Morrow estate outside Greenwich, Connecticut. White roses framed Sebastian's portrait. Board members, attorneys, clergy, old family friends, and 2 society reporters watched Lenora Morrow press a folded handkerchief beneath one perfectly dry eye. "Elisa has carried a burden no young widow should have to carry," she said. "For the good of this family, and for her own protection, I will ask the trustees to suspend her voting authority until she is well again." I stood at the edge of the tent, in a soaked black dress, holding the phone inside my purse. 3 hours earlier, I had heard that same grieving mother speak in a voice as cold and steady as winter glass. Sebastian was going to remove me, Lenora had told her younger son, Ryan. What happened at Lake Vinola was necessary. If Elisa dies as the unstable widow everyone already believes her to be, the shares come home. For 2 years, I had believed Sebastian died because his SUV left a wet mountain road. I had blamed the storm, the guardrail, and sometimes myself, because grief will accuse anyone when it cannot find the truth. That morning, I learned the road had only been the stage. My name is Elisa Barrera Morrow. I was 32 then, and I had spent most of my adult life learning how to make myself smaller in rooms built for richer people. My parents owned a neighborhood bakery in Queens. I met Sebastian when Morrow Development hired the community design firm where I worked to renovate an abandoned public library. He arrived late to our first meeting with rain in his hair, carrying coffee for everyone and apologizing to the receptionist before he greeted the executives. He was the eldest son of one of the wealthiest real estate families in the Northeast, but he could spend an hour discussing why a child needed a sunny reading corner. He cooked chilaquiles badly on Sundays because he wanted to impress my mother. He laughed at the stiffness of his surname. "Money is only useful," he once told me, "if it lets somebody live with less fear." Lenora never forgave him for loving a woman who understood money as shelter instead of power. At our engagement dinner, she examined my grandmother's silver bracelet and said, "How wonderfully sentimental." At our wedding, she told a photographer to crop my parents out of a family portrait because the composition was crowded. Sebastian heard her, cancelled the portrait, and spent the rest of the evening dancing with my mother. That was how he resisted Lenora, warmly, publicly, and without asking permission. After he died, I lost that shield. Lenora turned my grief into a job with rules. Every month I attended Mass beside her. Every anniversary required flowers at the cemetery, photographs beside the headstone, and lunch at the estate, where she reminded me to be discreet, grateful, and faithful to Sebastian's memory. When a college friend invited me for coffee 14 months after the funeral, Lenora heard about it before I got home. "Sebastian would hate to see you replacing him so quickly," she said. It had been coffee with a woman named Julia. I lived in the Brooklyn Heights apartment Sebastian left me and received distributions from a group of non-voting shares. I never asked what the shares were worth. Statements arrived, and I stacked them unopened in a desk drawer. Lenora preferred me broken. A grieving widow who did not read financial documents was easier to display than a shareholder who asked questions. On the morning of the memorial, Lenora called while I was wrapping white lilies. "I cannot visit the cemetery today, darling," she whispered. "This migraine has taken my sight. Tell my boy his mother still cries for him." It was the first time she had missed her own ritual. After leaving the cemetery, I stopped at a deli for chicken soup and drove to the estate. I still had an old brass key because Sebastian had once insisted that family should never have to ring a bell. The foyer was silent. I called Lenora's name and heard voices beyond the library that had once been Sebastian's father's study. Lenora did not sound sick. She did not sound old. She sounded impatient. "I am tired of performing grief in front of a stone, Ryan." I stopped in the hall. The soup tray warmed my palms. "You said he would only be scared," Ryan answered. "You said nobody would die." I set the tray on a narrow table and took out my phone. My thumb found the recorder. "Lower your voice," Lenora said. "You disabled the cameras. You delivered what we needed. Your gambling debt disappeared. Do not pretend you were a child. I didn't put it in his drink. No. You simply opened the door for the man who did." There was a pause long enough for me to hear the grandfather clock behind me. Ryan spoke again. "And Elisa? Her usefulness ended when Sebastian died. The trust returns her voting block to me if she dies or is declared incapacitated before 35. The board already believes she is unstable. One crisis in the right place will finish it." My fingers went numb. The tray slipped. A glass soup jar struck the marble and shattered. "Who is there?" Lenora shouted. I ran. A housekeeper called after me, but but I reached my car before Lenora crossed the portico. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing upright. In the rain without a cane, migraine, or tears. I did not go home. I drove to Julia's townhouse in Cobble Hill and told her everything twice because the first telling came out in fragments. Julia locked the doors, took my phone charger from my purse, and called Rebecca Salazar, a litigation attorney she knew from a non-profit board. Rebecca arrived in jeans and a navy coat. She listened to the recording once with her eyes closed and a second time, while taking notes. "Do not confront her," she said. "Do not return to your apartment alone. Send me every message she has ever written. If this woman planned a death, she also planned how to discredit anyone who noticed." The memorial was already scheduled for that afternoon. Rebecca wanted me to stay away. I insisted on going because vanishing would become proof of the breakdown Lenora intended to manufacture. Julia fastened the zipper of my black dress when my hands shook too badly to do it. "You don't have to be fearless," she said. "You only have to know what you're protecting." At the estate, Lenora greeted me beneath the tent with an embrace for the cameras. Her mouth brushed my ear. "You should have accepted the life I allowed you." Then she stepped to the microphone and announced my supposed instability. A retired director moved his chair so I could not approach the front table. Two women who had called me brave looked at me with soft, humiliating pity. Lenora raised a crystal glass beneath Sebastian's portrait and tried to bury me inside my own reputation. I did not shout. I raised my purse. "How generous of you, Lenora. My representatives will review every word of that trust tomorrow." Her smile narrowed. For the first time since Sebastian's funeral, I saw uncertainty enter her eyes. That night, Rebecca obtained an emergency copy of the trust from its corporate administrator. We sat around Julia's dining table with cold pizza, legal pads, and Sebastian's financial statements. At 1:10 a.m., Rebecca stopped reading. "Here it is. If you die or are adjudicated incapacitated before your 35th birthday, your shares revert to Lenora. Sebastian's voting interest passes to Ryan." "Why would Sebastian sign that?" Julia asked. "He didn't," Rebecca said. "His father created the original trust. Sebastian amended other sections after your marriage, but this clause remained. He may have been trying to change it when he died." My phone vibrated. The message came from Lenora. "You could have lived comfortably on my son's memory. You chose questions. Sign the incapacity petition, or your grief will end the way everyone expects." Rebecca photographed the screen and placed my phone in an evidence bag. I read the message again. For 2 years, grief had felt like an ocean above my head. That night, something changed. I did not feel less sorrow. I felt direction. Sebastian was no longer asking me to mourn him correctly. He was asking me to uncover what he had tried to stop. We began with the accident file. The official report said Sebastian lost control of his SUV near the family's lake house in northeastern Pennsylvania during heavy rain. His blood alcohol level was below the legal limit. He had suffered a head injury in the crash and drowned after the vehicle entered a ravine flooded by storm water. The conclusion had been quick, clean, and convenient. Rebecca hired Thomas Ibarra, a retired insurance investigator. With a patient voice and a habit of aligning every paper edge before he spoke. He requested the police file, insurance photographs, tow records, phone logs, and security data from the lake house. Then he found the first buried inconsistency. The exterior cameras at the property had gone offline for exactly 94 seconds on the night Sebastian died. "A storm outage does not begin and end cleanly in 94 seconds, Thomas said. Somebody used an administrator code." The access history showed Ryan's credential. The second inconsistency came from an emergency room toxicology note. A resident had written that Sebastian's blood showed an unidentified sedative pattern inconsistent with the medication listed in his chart. The note disappeared from the final summary, and no confirmatory test had been ordered. "Who stopped it?" I asked. Thomas tapped the name of a hospital board member who had called the medical director that night, Arthur Vale, Lenora's longtime attorney. I remembered Arthur at the funeral, guiding me away from the casket because I was too fragile. I remembered signing 3 papers in a side room while tranquilizers blurred the lines. Rebecca found copies. One authorized routine estate administration. Another waived an independent review of the vehicle. "This waiver may not survive a challenge," she said, "but it tells us they were cleaning the path before you could see it." While we moved through documents, Lenora moved through people. She sent a private memorandum to directors claiming my emotional health had deteriorated. She told family friends I had stopped taking medication I had never been prescribed. A gossip site published a photograph of me leaving Rebecca's office under the headline, "Tragic Heiress in Crisis." The photographer had been waiting before I arrived. At a foundation luncheon in Manhattan, Lenora placed me at a table near the kitchen instead of beside the family. When the program began, she departed from her prepared remarks. Some people cling to wealth because they cannot accept loss, she said, turning toward me with rehearsed compassion. Our family hopes Elisa chooses treatment over conflict. Phones rose around the ballroom. I felt heat climb my neck, but I walked to the microphone during questions. My grief has never been for sale, I said. Her accounts, her trust clauses, and her threats are ready for review. The room went still. Lenora gripped her water glass until her knuckles whitened. I had not accused her of murder. I had done something more useful. I had let the board know documents existed. The next morning, Morrow Development's compliance officer called Rebecca. 3 internal accountants wanted confidential meetings. Sebastian had spent his final months examining consulting payments routed through companies that seemed to have no employees. The payments were authorized by Lenora's office and approved by Arthur Vale. One company, Northline Protective Services, had received $480,000 over 18 months. Its owner, Julian Crow, had supervised security at the lake house the weekend. Sebastian died. Thomas traced Julian to a house in Stamford, but the house was empty. A neighbor said Julian had left suddenly after men came asking for him. We learned Lenora was searching too. I began sleeping in Julia's guest room. Rebecca arranged private security without telling the Morrow board where I was. We changed cars twice. Still, Lenora reached me through memory. She sent a box containing Sebastian's watch, the one recovered after the crash. There was no note. The crystal was cracked at 11:47, the time police estimated the SUV left the road. I held the watch in both hands until I noticed something Thomas had missed in the evidence photographs. The leather strap had been replaced. Sebastian wore a dark brown strap with a small burn mark from our first apartment stove. The one in the box was black and new. Thomas compared serial numbers and called the evidence custodian. The watch released to the family after the investigation had been brown. Someone had exchanged it after Lenora received it. Why send me a false watch? I asked. To frighten you, Rebecca said. Or to make you focus on the wrong object. I remembered a feature Sebastian loved. The watch stored emergency health data and could synchronize activity records to his phone. His phone had never been recovered, but the watch backup might have reached our shared home computer before his trip. My apartment was dangerous, yet the computer was evidence. With police notified through Rebecca, Thomas and I returned in daylight. The doorman looked embarrassed when he saw us. Mrs. Morrow's office sent a technician yesterday, he said. He said there was a water sensor failure. The lock showed scratches. Inside, drawers were open and the desk computer was gone. Nothing else had been taken. Lenora called while officers photographed the room. People become careless when they are upset, she said. You should let me help before your behavior embarrasses Sebastian further. You broke into my home. That sounds paranoid, Elisa. So did murder yesterday. She was silent for half a breath. Be at the annual shareholders meeting on Friday. Sign what Arthur gives you. You may keep the apartment and a generous allowance. And if I refuse? Then the world will watch you fall apart. She ended the call. Rebecca had recorded it under Connecticut's applicable consent rules after confirming the legal route. It was intimidation, but not yet proof of Sebastian's death. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number. I did not want him dead. She will make me carry everything. Help me. It was Ryan. We arranged to meet in a crowded coffee shop near Grand Central. Rebecca sat at another table, and Thomas watched the entrance. Ryan arrived 20 minutes late with bruised shadows beneath his eyes and a wrinkled suit. He had always been the charming, reckless younger brother, forgiven before he apologized. Now he looked older than Sebastian had ever been. My mother knows you have the recording, he said. What did you do at the lake house? He wrapped both hands around a coffee he did not drink. Sebastian discovered the shell companies. He planned to remove Mama's chair and transfer his voting proxy to you while an outside firm investigated. I owed $630,000 to people who did not send polite reminders. Mom bought the debt. And the price? She wanted the camera system down. Julian gave me a vial and said Sebastian would become disoriented, nothing more. I handed it to him. I left before dinner. You delivered poison to my husband and left. I thought it was a sedative. You thought fear changed what you carried? His face folded. For a moment, I saw the boy who followed Sebastian through our wedding reception asking him to fix one more mistake. I also saw a grown man who had chosen his dad over his brother. Ryan placed an old phone on the table. It contained messages from Lenora, bank transfers, a photograph of the vial, and instructions to use his administrator code at 10:32 p.m. One message read, "The correction happens at the lake." Another said, "Your brother signs nothing after tonight." There is more, Ryan whispered. She is planning something for you. She said your crisis has to happen before Friday's vote. Julian was supposed to enter your apartment, leave pills, and make it look as if you had been mixing them with alcohol. Now Julian has disappeared, and she thinks I warned him. Will you testify? Rebecca asked, joining us. Ryan shook his head immediately. If she knows I talked, she will destroy me. I leaned across the table. She already destroyed your brother. You can decide whether you bury him in silence too. He stared at me, then at Sebastian's last message on the old phone. It had been sent 3 days before the crash. You can still choose who you become. Ryan began to cry without making a sound. On Thursday morning, Lenora filed an emergency petition claiming I was a danger to myself and incapable of managing trust assets. Attached were statements from a psychiatrist I had never met and 2 household employees who claimed they had seen me intoxicated. One statement described a scene at the estate on a date when passport records proved I was in Montreal with Julia. Rebecca dismantled the petition in an emergency hearing. The judge refused to declare me incapacitated, but he scheduled a fuller review and temporarily restricted both Lenora and me from moving trust assets. Lenora got what she needed for Friday: uncertainty. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us. A man pushed a microphone close to my face and asked whether grief had caused a psychotic break. Behind him, Lenora descended the steps slowly, one hand on Arthur's arm, performing sorrow. I wanted to expose the recording right there. Rebecca stopped me. She wants chaos, she said. We give the board sequence, evidence, and witnesses. That afternoon, Thomas recovered a cloud backup from an old laptop Sebastian had given my father. Months before his death, Sebastian had used it during a visit to Queens. His watch had synchronized a small packet of health and location data. At 10:41 on the night he died, his heart rate fell abruptly while he was still inside the lake house. At 10:58, the watch recorded movement consistent with being carried. The SUV did not leave the property until 11:16. Sebastian had not become impaired on the road. He had been unconscious before someone placed him in the vehicle. The data also contained a 12-second voice memo triggered accidentally. Rain struck windows. Julian said, "He's breathing." A woman replied, "Then make the road finish it." The woman's voice was Lenora's. I listened once. The room tilted, and Julia caught my shoulders. Until then, a stubborn part of me had imagined a misunderstanding, a sedative, a panic, an accident made worse by cowards. The voice memo ended that mercy. Lenora had stood near my unconscious husband and chosen the ravine. I went into Julia's bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor. I remembered Sebastian asleep with flour on his cheek. After trying to bake bread during the pandemic. I remembered his hand on the small of my back at crowded parties. I remembered our last argument because he canceled dinner to handle an emergency at the lake house. I had said, "Sometimes I feel married to a closed door." He had kissed my forehead and answered, "I'm trying to open one." Those were our last private words. I cried until my ribs hurt. Then I washed my face and returned to the table. "We play the memo tomorrow," I said. Rebecca shook her head. "Not first. If we reveal everything immediately, Arthur will attack chain of custody, and Lenora will flee behind an injunction. We lead with her own threat, force Ryan to establish the plan, then introduce the technical evidence. And if Ryan runs? Then you speak. You are not a container for his courage." At 2 a.m., Ryan vanished from the hotel where Rebecca had placed him. His room was empty. The old phone remained in her evidence safe, but our living witness was gone. A lobby camera showed him entering a black sedan registered to an Moro subsidiary. The disappearance opened a hole beneath every plan we had made. Ryan was not only a witness. He was the person who connected Lenora's words to the 94 missing seconds. Without him, Arthur could describe the messages as family shorthand, the transfers as debt relief, and the vial as an invention planted by a desperate widow. Rebecca called the district attorney's office and asked for an emergency welfare check. Thomas enlarged the lobby footage frame by frame. The sedan's plate was clear, but the registered corporate garage claimed the vehicle had been taken without authorization. A garage attendant remembered Arthur Vale arriving after midnight with 2 men from Northline. His supervisor ordered him not to enter the visit in the log. "Will he say that on the record?" I asked. Thomas looked at me over his glasses. "He has 3 children and a job controlled by the people we are investigating. Courage becomes expensive when rent is due." I understood that better than he knew. Lenora's true weapon had never been money alone. It was the way her money entered other people's ordinary needs. A school payment, a medical bill, a promotion, a debt. She placed a hand around each vulnerability and called the pressure loyalty. We went to the garage together. The attendant was a 46-year-old man named Omar Bell who kept checking the office window while we spoke beside the ticket machines. He said he had seen Ryan in the rear seat. Ryan was conscious, but one of the men held his phone. Arthur told Omar that Ryan was having a family episode. Did Ryan say anything? Rebecca asked. Omar swallowed. He looked at me and said, "Tell my brother I finally understand." I knew his brother was dead. I thought he was drunk. Rebecca promised that any statement would be handled through investigators, not the company. Omar gave us a copy of a handwritten maintenance sheet showing the sedan's departure time. When he handed it over, his fingers shook. "Mrs. Morrow paid for my daughter's surgery," he said. I thought that meant she was good. "It means your daughter deserved surgery," I answered. "It does not mean Lenora owns what you saw." His eyes filled. He signed the statement. That small act changed me. Until then, I had imagined justice as a dramatic exposure, one recording played in the right room, one villain unmasked before witnesses. In reality, justice was being assembled by frightened people deciding that a fact still belonged to them. A resident's forgotten toxicology note. An attendant's handwritten time. A housekeeper's memory of a cane left untouched. The truth had survived because Lenora considered ordinary people too insignificant to notice it. Thomas returned to the Lakehouse file and located the original 911 call. Julian had reported the crash from a roadside pullout at 11:53 p.m. He claimed he had been driving home when he saw broken branches. Cell tower records placed his phone near the Lakehouse until 11:37, then along the route to the ravine. Lenora's phone had been turned off, but her car's service system recorded a diagnostic connection at the property at 10:48. The car manufacturer initially refused to release it without a warrant. Rebecca sent the information to prosecutors, who obtained 1 hour later. The recovered data showed Lenora's sedan leaving the Lakehouse behind Sebastian's SUV and stopping near the ravine for 7 minutes. The timeline no longer resembled an accident. It resembled a procession. I asked Thomas to take me to the road. Rebecca objected because the shareholders' meeting was less than a day away, but I needed to see the place that had occupied my nightmares as an abstraction. Rain had stopped when we reached Pennsylvania. The lake house sat among pines above dark water, its stone walls immaculate and empty. A caretaker admitted us after investigators confirmed the warrant. The dining room faced the lake. Sebastian's chair was still at the end of a long oak table, as though wealthy families could preserve furniture more easily than truth. I walked through his last known movements. He had poured a drink at the bar. Julian had entered through the service hall during the camera outage. Ryan had left through the garage. Lenora had arrived through the front entrance. On the rug beside the fireplace, investigators had photographed a faint stain dismissed as spilled bourbon. In the pantry, Thomas noticed that the baseboard beneath a wine cabinet did not align with the wall. The caretaker said Sebastian had installed a small safe there for property documents. Police opened it under the warrant. The safe was empty except for a memory card taped beneath a removable shelf. The card contained photographs of invoices, lists of vendor accounts, and a video Sebastian had recorded 5 days before his death. He sat at the Lakehouse desk wearing the brown-strapped watch. He looked exhausted. "If Elisa ever sees this," he began, then stopped and rubbed his eyes. "No. That isn't fair." He started again. "I found evidence that my mother used Northline and 6 shell vendors to move company money. Ryan's debts gave her leverage. Arthur helped hide approvals. I am meeting her Friday to demand her resignation. Elisa does not know because I keep telling myself secrecy protects her. The truth is that I am afraid she will look at my family and see what I was too slow to confront." He leaned toward the camera. "Elisa, if I fail to come home, do not believe any story that asks you to surrender your judgment. Trust Rebecca Salazar. Trust Uncle Alexander. And please know that every closed door between us was my mistake, not yours." I watched the video twice. It was not the miraculous farewell grief story's promise. He did not predict the exact danger. He did not say all the words I wanted. He was frightened, ashamed, and trying too late to repair a choice that made him feel alive enough to break me. Thomas turned away while I cried. When I could speak, I asked why Sebastian had named Rebecca. She told me they had met 6 months before the crash. He had quietly sought advice about protecting me and reporting the shell companies. Attorney-client restrictions had prevented her from volunteering his confidential information after his death, especially because Arthur controlled the estate records. The discovery of Lenora's crime had changed what could be disclosed. "You knew he was afraid?" I asked. "I knew he believed financial retaliation was possible," Rebecca said over the phone. "He never told me he expected physical harm. If I had known, I would have acted." Part of me wanted to blame her because blame was easier than accepting how many careful adults had underestimated Lenora. Instead, I asked the harder question. "Did he trust me?" "Completely," she said. "He did not trust the danger around you. He confused excluding you with protecting you." On the drive back to New York, I watched the pines move past the window and thought about the marriage I had lost. Love can be real and still contain a failure. Sebastian loved my strength in public, yet when the danger became private, he decided alone what I could bear. Lenora treated people as possessions. Sebastian never did that, but fear had made him treat me as someone to shield rather than a partner who could choose. I decided that if I survived Friday, I would tell the whole truth about him, not a saint murdered by a monster, but a good man whose secrecy created room for a monster to move. Back at Julia's house, we found a padded envelope on the front step. It contained photographs of me entering the Pennsylvania Lake House and a copy of an involuntary commitment form with blank physician signatures. Across the top, someone had written, "She went back to the scene." Julia stared down the street. "They followed you." The security officer searched the block and found no one. Rebecca added the envelope to the evidence. I noticed the photographs had been taken from inside a vehicle position near the property gate. In one reflection, a dashboard permit was visible. Thomas enhanced it enough to identify a private ambulance company owned by another Moro vendor. Lenora did not merely intend to plant pills. She had arranged transportation that could remove me from public view under the appearance of medical care. Rebecca called the company. Its dispatcher denied any scheduled pickup, then admitted under subpoena that Arthur had reserved an ambulance for Friday afternoon at the hotel. The patient name was mine. The note said, "Acute bereavement psychosis, family authorized." "They were going to lose the vote and take you anyway," Julia said. The plan explained Lenora's confidence. Even if the board hesitated, a filmed scene of me restrained outside a family meeting would become the evidence she needed. By the time a judge reviewed it, Arthur could move the trust through emergency procedures. We changed the entrance route for the meeting and alerted hotel security. Rebecca warned me that Lenora might provoke me on camera. "She will use Sebastian," she said. "She will say something cruel enough to make you react. Your anger is justified, but she has built a machine that converts your emotion into her evidence. So I have to act calm while she discusses killing him? You have to choose where the anger lands." Julia helped me select a navy suit instead of morning black. Lenora had dressed me as a widow for 2 years. I wanted the board to see a shareholder, an architect, and a woman who had arrived to make decisions. Before dawn, I called my parents. I had hidden the danger from them because I feared Lenora would reach their bakery. My mother listened without interrupting, then asked the question nobody else had asked. "Did you eat?" I laughed and cried at once. My father drove to Brooklyn with bread still warm from the oven. He wanted to attend the meeting. I asked him to stay with my mother and keep the bakery closed. "Your husband once stood in my kitchen and promised he would never make you ashamed of where you came from," my father said. "Do not let his mother make you ashamed of being afraid." He placed Sebastian's wedding ring in my palm. Police had returned it with the genuine brown strapped watch after reopening the evidence. I put the ring on a chain beneath my blouse. Not as armor. As a reminder that my marriage had belonged to 2 imperfect people, not to Lenora's mythology. Lenora sent me a single photograph, Ryan sitting beside her in the rear seat, staring at the floor. "Family should resolve family matters privately," the message said. Rebecca wanted police to intervene. Ryan called before they could locate the car. "I'm fine," he said in a flat voice. "I made everything up. Elisa pressured me because she wants control." Then, almost too softly to hear, he added, "Sebastian always hated cold coffee." The call ended. I knew what he meant. At the coffee shop, he had never touched his cup. Under the cardboard sleeve, while Rebecca and I were distracted by the phone, he had written an address, a storage facility in White Plains. Thomas drove there with police. Inside a rented unit registered through Northline, they found the missing computer from my apartment, boxes of Moro financial records, unused prescription bottles labeled with my name, and a second set of license plates matching a car photographed near the lake house. They did not find Ryan. Friday's annual meeting took place in the ballroom of a Moro hotel in Midtown. A 12-foot portrait of Sebastian hung behind the stage. Lenora wore pearl gray and spoke about continuity, stability, and the duty of families to protect vulnerable members from themselves. "With compassion," she said, "I request that Elisa Barrera Moro's voting rights remain suspended pending treatment." Some directors nodded. Others avoided my eyes. Arthur had placed a medical consent form and resignation letter at my seat. The ballroom doors opened. I entered with Rebecca, Julia, and Thomas. I was afraid, but fear no longer controlled the direction of my body. Lenora stopped speaking. "Before you vote to silence me," I said, taking the floor microphone, "you should hear why Lenora Moro needs everyone to believe I cannot speak for myself." The recording from her study filled the ballroom. "If Elisa dies as the unstable widow everyone already believes her to be, the shares come home." Someone gasped. A director stood. Lenora lunged toward the audiovisual table. "Turn off that defamatory fabrication." Rebecca stepped into the aisle holding a binder. "Not yet." The board has received authenticated copies, along with the trust clause, the threatening messages, and the court filing supported by demonstrably false statements. Arthur demanded security remove us. The hotel's security director did not move. Federal agents and state investigators entered through a side door, but they remained along the wall. They had warrants for records, not yet an arrest warrant for Lenora. Then Ryan walked through the main doors. His lower lip was split, and one cuff of his shirt was stained with blood. 2 detectives accompanied him. Lenora's composure cracked for the first time. "Do not do this, son," she said. "You are sick. She manipulated you." Ryan took the microphone. "No, Mom. I disabled the cameras because you ordered me to. I delivered the vial because you said Sebastian would not be harmed. When he died, you paid my debts to buy my silence. Last night, Arthur's men tried to make me sign a statement blaming Elisa. I escaped at a gas station." Lenora lifted her chin. "An indebted addict will say anything to save himself." "That is why the evidence does not depend on me," Ryan said. Rebecca projected the transfers to Northline, Lenora's messages, the photograph of the vial, and the altered security log. Thomas explained the watch data without drama. A forensic toxicologist confirmed that the recovered vial contained a fast-acting sedative capable of causing respiratory collapse, especially when combined with the medication Sebastian had taken for a back injury. The room had stopped being a family meeting. It had become a place where decades of obedience were breaking at once. The first major reversal came when Julian Crowe entered with agents. He had surrendered that morning after learning Lenora planned to blame him and Ryan for everything. "She paid for the operation," he said, looking at the carpet instead of me. Ryan opened the cameras. "I put the sedative in Sebastian's drink. Mrs. Morrow arrived after he collapsed. I said we needed an ambulance. She told me to put him in the SUV." Lenora's face drained of color. Julian continued. "I drove the SUV near the washed-out curve. Another man followed. We pushed it through the guardrail. 2 weeks ago, she contacted me again. She wanted me to stage an overdose in Elisa's apartment before this meeting." "You are all feeding on my family," Lenora shouted. Sebastian was going to hand the name, the company, and everything his father built to an outsider. I walked toward the stage. I was his wife. You made yourself the outsider when you decided your son's life was worth less than your control. The second reversal came from the director's table. Alexander Morrow, the older brother of Sebastian's late father, rose with a sealed envelope. "Sebastian gave me this 1 week before he died," he said. "He asked me to open it only if something happened to him or if Lenora challenged Elisa's capacity." Lenora turned sharply. "That is impossible." Alexander read Sebastian's letter aloud. "If my mother claims Elisa is unfit, that claim itself should be treated as evidence that I failed to stop her in time. Elisa must retain my voting proxy and commission an independent review of every company Lenora controls. Ryan is compromised by debt, but I believe he can still tell the truth. Do not let my wife mistake grief for obedience." My tears came before I could stop them. Sebastian had known danger was approaching. He had not told me enough, and part of me would always be angry about that. But he had left a door exactly where he promised. The third reversal came from someone nobody had noticed, Margaret Chen, Morrow Development's chief financial officer. She stood and announced that 4 independent directors had already signed a resolution suspending Lenora and Arthur from all corporate authority. The forensic audit had identified $18.6 million routed through shell vendors. Copies were with prosecutors and regulators. "This resolution becomes effective immediately," Margaret said. "Mrs. Morrow no longer controls the company's accounts, security, or legal department." Lenora looked toward Arthur. He stepped away from her. For years, her power had lived in the expectation that everyone nearby would obey before she finished speaking. Now the room refused. Rebecca played the 12-second voice memo. "He's breathing. Then make the road finish it." The sound was quiet, almost lost beneath recorded rain. That made it worse. Murder did not arrive as a scream. It arrived in Lenora's ordinary voice, issuing one more instruction. The agents approached her. "Lenora Morrow, you need to come with us in connection with the death of Sebastian Morrow, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and attempted fraud against the trust." She did not cry. She looked at me as an officer guided her hands behind her back. "He was mine before he was yours." "Children are not property," I said. "Neither are widows." Arthur tried to leave through a service door and was stopped. Ryan gave a complete statement. He did not walk away clean. He had disabled the cameras, carried the vial, accepted his mother's money, and remained silent for 2 years. Before detectives took him to be processed, he asked me to forgive him. "I don't want your forgiveness," I said. "I want you to tell the truth every time somebody asks, especially when it costs you." The months that followed were not a victory montage. They were depositions, hearings, nightmares, and mornings when I reached for Sebastian before remembering the shape of the empty bed. Reporters waited outside Julia's house. Commentators debated whether I had been naive or calculating. People who had ignored me at the memorial sent flowers and claimed they had always suspected Lenora. I returned every arrangement from anyone who had voted to suspend me. Prosecutors reconstructed the final night. Sebastian confronted Lenora about the shell companies at the lake house. Ryan disabled the cameras. Julian drugged Sebastian's bourbon. Lenora arrived after he collapsed and refused an ambulance. Julian and another contractor placed him in the SUV and staged the crash. Arthur pressured the hospital and arranged the waiver I signed while sedated. Each act had seemed small enough to deny alone. Together, they formed a machine. Ryan pleaded guilty to conspiracy and evidence tampering in exchange for testimony. Julian pleaded guilty and identified the second contractor. Arthur faced charges related to obstruction, fraud, and witness intimidation. Lenora remained in custody after a judge described her attempts to control witnesses as extraordinary. The official finding on Sebastian's death changed from accidental to homicide. That single word did not comfort me. It gave the pain an address. Lenora's criminal trial began 11 months later. Her defense portrayed Julian as a rogue contractor, Ryan as a bitter addict, and me as an ambitious outsider who exploited a family tragedy. They played clips of me crying after the funeral and displayed photographs from the foundation luncheon as though sadness and ambition could not occupy the same body. When I testified, Arthur's former partner asked why I had continued accepting trust distributions if I distrusted the family. The question was designed to make survival look like greed. Because the money was legally mine, I said. And because abuse does not become generosity when the person causing it pays the electric bill. He asked why I had not investigated sooner. Because they told me my husband died in an accident. Because professionals signed reports. Because grief made getting out of bed feel like work. And because Lenora carefully taught everyone around me to treat my questions as symptoms. The jury listened to the study recording, the watch memo, Ryan's testimony, Julian's account, and Sebastian's video. The defense attacked every piece separately. Rebecca had prepared me for that strategy. A conspiracy rarely leaves one perfect object labeled truth. It leaves overlapping imperfections that point in the same direction. Omar Bell testified about the night Ryan was taken. The hospital resident testified that Arthur pressured supervisors to remove the toxicology concern. The housekeeper admitted Lenora had ordered staff to tell visitors she suffered from migraines whenever she needed privacy. Margaret explained the shell companies. My father testified that Sebastian left the old laptop in Queens months before his death, establishing the path of the watch backup. The most painful witness was the paramedic who recovered Sebastian. She said the injury pattern did not fully match a conscious driver bracing during a crash. She had raised the concern, but a senior officer told her the family wanted privacy and the storm explained everything. Lenora never took the stand. She sat at the defense table in cream suits and wrote notes while other people described the consequences of her orders. Once, while the jury was out, she turned toward me and mouthed, "He chose you over blood." I understood then that she still believed this was the crime, not theft, not coercion, not murder, but a son's refusal to remain owned by his mother. The jury found her guilty of murder, conspiracy, fraud, and witness intimidation. The judge imposed a sentence that meant she would likely die in prison. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked whether I felt justice had been served. Justice was served by everyone she thought was too frightened or too ordinary to matter, I said. It does not bring Sebastian back. Ryan received a reduced sentence because of his cooperation, but the judge refused to erase his responsibility. In a letter, he wrote that prison was the first place where his mother's money could not purchase a new version of him. I did not visit for a long time. When I finally did, we sat across scratched glass and spoke about Sebastian without turning him into evidence. Ryan told me that when they were boys, Sebastian took punishment for a window Ryan broke. Lenora praised Sebastian's loyalty and never asked Ryan to confess. She taught us love meant letting the strongest person control the story, he said. And Sebastian kept protecting you, I replied. Until protection became permission. It was the clearest thing Ryan had ever said. I did not forgive him that day, but I stopped needing him to remain a monster for my anger to make sense. The trust litigation took longer. Lenora's attorneys argued that Sebastian's letter was only advisory. Rebecca used the recording, threats, fraudulent petition, and corporate evidence to show that enforcing the incapacity clause in Lenora's favor would reward coercion. The court froze the reversion and upheld Sebastian's voting proxy while the estate case proceeded. Morrow Development offered me a permanent board seat. I nearly refused. Every polished conference room reminded me of the ballroom where people had evaluated my sanity while eating catered lunch. Margaret asked me to visit 2 properties before deciding. The first was a luxury tower Lenora praised in annual reports. The second was an apartment complex in Newark where tenants had filed complaints about mold, broken heat, and intimidation by a management company linked to Northline. Sebastian's notes showed he planned to redirect capital toward repairs and affordable housing commitments after removing his mother. I accepted the seat with conditions: an independent ethics office, protection for employee whistleblowers, tenant representation in redevelopment reviews, and a fund for people trapped in coercive financial arrangements inside family businesses. I did not want to rule the way Lenora had ruled. I wanted fewer locked rooms. Some directors called the conditions sentimental. Margaret asked them how sentiment differed from risk management when ignored people were the ones who eventually brought down an empire. The vote passed. My first months on the board were uncomfortable. I asked basic questions and refused to feel ashamed of them. I visited construction sites without a camera crew. I met employees whose names Lenora never learned. When I did not understand a balance sheet, I stayed until I did. Power became less mysterious once nobody could use my embarrassment to keep me silent. Julia returned to her own life after living inside mine for half a year. On the day I moved back to Brooklyn Heights, she put a new lock on my door and stocked the refrigerator with soup. "In a jar that won't shatter," she said. We laughed harder than the joke deserved. It was the first laughter in my apartment since Sebastian died. I found traces of him everywhere: a pencil mark beside a bookshelf, a chipped blue bowl, a note in a cookbook warning that his chilaquiles were legally classified as breakfast. Grief no longer felt like an order to stop living. It felt like a room I could enter and leave. 1 year after the shareholders' meeting, I went alone to Sebastian's grave. The morning was bright and cold. I brought fresh lilies and a copy of his letter. For the first time, there were no photographers, no white tent, and no woman instructing me where to stand. "I heard you late," I told him. "But I heard you." Wind moved through the bare branches. I placed the letter beneath the flowers and sat on the damp grass. I told him about the Newark repairs, Margaret's terrible coffee, my father's opinion that every board meeting needed better bread, and the fact that Ryan had begun counseling other inmates about gambling addiction. I told him I was still angry that he had tried to protect me with secrecy. Love did not erase that anger. Truth had taught me not to confuse forgiveness with silence. Lenora sent 1 letter from jail before trial. She wrote that I had destroyed her family and stolen her son's legacy. I did not answer. A woman who ordered her son's silence could not teach me the meaning of family. Instead, I framed 1 sentence from Sebastian's letter and hung it above my desk: "Do not let my wife mistake grief for obedience." For 2 years, I believed being a good widow meant remaining small, sad, and grateful for whatever a powerful family allowed me to keep. I thought loyalty required me to protect their name even when their name was crushing mine. I was wrong. Loving Sebastian did not mean letting the people who betrayed him erase me too. Lenora wanted the world to remember a fragile widow who died of sorrow. Instead, they remembered the wife who opened a grave built from lies, recovered her husband's voice, and walked out carrying her own name. That name no longer sounded borrowed when I said it. Barrera carried my parents' flower-dusted mornings, and Morrow carried the man I loved without surrendering me to the woman who raised him. I kept both because choosing myself did not require deleting him. It required refusing the version of love that demanded silence. On difficult mornings, I still touched the ring beneath my blouse. Then I opened the office door, asked the next uncomfortable question, and listened for the quiet person in the room whom power had trained everyone else to ignore.